We're going to talk about creaking bikes. It's going to be awesome. So we're going to be talking about creaking bikes, how to prevent creak, what causes creaks.
Yeah.
All, what components to check. It's not always the same thing, but people tend to think it's all the same thing. All right. We're fixing bikes here at Sea Otter, and it seems to be a theme. There is a lot of bikes making noises, weird noises, strange noises, a lot of creaking, a lot of bottom bracket creaks. A lot of people jump right to the bottom bracket, this poor, misunderstood piece of machinery down here, bearings pressed in this case, bearings threaded in. Okay, over the dozen bikes that we've seen this week that have been creaking, one of them have been the bottom bracket. So, what causes a creak, sir? There's no wrong answer.
Misalignment.
Misalignment, that could be. Not typically the case, but you win anyways. What do you think causes creaks? There's no wrong answer.
Poor lubrication.
Poor lubrication, definitely a possibility for creak. So lubrication, you need to lubricate things that move, and you also need to lubricate threads. This morning, Calvin talked about tension and threads and how to get the correct tension using torque and proper thread preparation to get that tension and reduce and getting things up to torque. So oftentimes that's the cause of a creak, something not being brought up to torque or not being properly lubricated and not being allowed to get to torque. So what actually causes a creak is movement. You've got two pieces moving against each other. It's like a cricket and its wings and its legs. Crick, 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 crick. So how that happens is something is typically loose or not lubricated properly. Some very common places for a creak would be, so the misunderstood bottom bracket, that is sometimes a place where a creak can happen, but it's not as common as some other ones. One very, very, very common one, the rear quick release or the rear through axle on a modern mountain bike, they're just not tight. You just gotta crank that down. That's the first place to start. That's a great place to start.
What size?
What do you think the best way to start diagnosing a creak would be? You gotta ride the bike. You gotta verify the concern. You gotta try to understand it. If someone comes up, my bike is creaking, take it for a ride. And then you can understand when it's happening. Or a common one, you'll walk into a bike shop, put the bike on the ground in front of them, drop it. Another one to do, flex the bike back and forth, get a little bit of tension on it. And a lot of times the creaks happen under load. So you're creating load in a static situation. And you can isolate those creaks. And a good way to try to even isolate it even further would be to, if you get the creak, 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 you can put your finger around there and you can feel it. You can feel that movement. Another very, very common place for a creak, your pedals. Pedals not being up, not properly tensioned. And a lot of times what causes that is lack of lubrication or lack of thread preparation. Another one, dropper seat posts, very common. They creak in the saddle. And it's actually the actual clamp at the seat post causes that creak. It's just dry and the fasteners are not tight enough. Where's another potential point for creaking? Definitely could be, definitely seen the brakes creaking. Like when you pull the brake, creak, 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 creak. The caliper might be a little bit loose or the threads didn't have proper preparation. Another very common one, handlebars, creaking at the handlebars. You can tell by when you're riding it, you're out there and you stand up off of the saddle and you just flex back and forth on it. And then you can isolate that. Or if you're riding along and you don't know exactly what it is, stand up off of the saddle, isolate the saddle. Move the front of the bike, move it back and forth. You're trying to narrow down where the problem is coming from. What do you think another potential point for creaking would be? Just yesterday, one of these bikes, it was just here. It came in, this thing is creaking like crazy. The hub was creaking. Rode it, felt really weird. Things were going on. what was happening was the pawls inside of the hub were dry, and that was allowing the movement to make noise. So in there's pawls, and in this case there was little wedges, and those were rubbing against each other and causing a creaking noise. So it just needed to be cleaned up, lubricated, and reassembled. And then problem solved. What's another point of creaking? That is totally correct. Inside the seat post, this is a slip fit. When you pull this out, it slides back in there, and you use a clamp to clamp it in place. If it's dry, it's gonna creak. And it can creak kind of, if it's not lubricated deep in here, that's gonna creak there. So when assembling a bike, there should be grease in the seat tube. So using a toothbrush or another kind of brush to get grease in the seat post, putting it in, clamping it down. Because water can get in here, debris can get in there, and really make it start to creak.
Use carbon paste or grease?
You could, if it's carbon, so in this case, carbon paste is a great option. The reason for carbon paste is because carbon is a slippery material. So when you put that in there, and if you were just to use grease, then under normal torque, it could slide down in the seat tube. So what happens is you use assembly paste or carbon paste, acts as grease, reduces the possibility of any creaking, creates separation of two different materials, and holds it in place by having little gritty particles that actually point load it and hold it in place so it doesn't slip. Awesome. Everybody's answered question. What do you think another creak? Yep, on the spot. Just point at it. What could it be? Where the wheel is. It could, another one this morning, just this morning, guy had a road bike, had just got done with a race, cool, fancy, black carbon bike, super cool. My bottom bracket is creaking. I picked that bike up and down, it was rattling. The headset was loose, and the headset was creaking. It was the headset, right up here. And if you dropped it, it was just bounce, 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 bounce. What's another one? What can cause creaking on your bike?
Dirt in your bearings.
Dirt in your bearings. He's got a full suspension bike. Full suspension bikes, linkages. Yeah, come on, bring that up here. This guy, all right. Yeah, let's see this thing. All right, linkages in your full sus bike. Listen.
Lots of saddle rails.
Exactly, saddle rails. We just talked about that. You can work this back and forth. That one's good. That one's a nice one. Pull it, clean it, reassemble it, torque those back down to spec, make sure the bolts have proper thread preparation, and you're good to go. It should take care of that problem. Another one, the main pivot. So what we're talking about here is these pivot points, sometimes they can come loose. And once they come loose, they're allowed to move, and that causes creaking. So those are also very frequent. Also, we encountered that earlier today. All of the bolts on this person's bike were all loose and they were all creaking. It sounded like a creaky mess. Before an event like this, torque the bolts on your bike. Torque is really important, but also with torque is proper thread preparation on those bolts. Most frame manufacturers will have those specs on their website, both the torque specs, which sometimes are on the bolts, and also the thread preparation that they want. A lot of times they'll have a diagram that says Loctite, thread locker, a anti-seize, or a grease. And they're going to tell you which one in which position. And if you're ever replacing bearings or anything like that, you're definitely going to want to look at what the manufacturer suggests. All right, this bike, I'm going to keep it for a second. You cool with that?
Yeah.
All right, another point of creak. Sounds like it's coming from the crank. Sounds like it's coming from the bottom bracket, but it's not. A lot of these direct mount chain rings, as you see here, there's no bolts out here, like a standard chain ring from a little bit older bikes. These can creak. If those start to come loose, that chain ring will actually creak, and it'll actually allow it to move. Another fun one, check out our video called the One by Rumble, is one by drivetrains are very common these days. Very common. So you never shift the front derailleur off of one chain ring to another chain ring. So you're focusing all of that wear on that chain ring. And when you focus all of that wear in one area, it wears out quicker. And a lot of them are aluminum. So what happens is the teeth start out shaped like this, almost a square. And then as they wear, it'll start to look more like a shark fin. And that shark fin will start to pull the chain up, and it'll kind of suck it. And then what you'll hear sounds like a creak, and it's the chain releasing off of those. But it's a little bit more like a rumble under really heavy load. And a lot of people associate that with a creak. So somebody will come up, my bike is creaking. Ride it, and sometimes it'll have that creaky sound to it. Worn out chain ring. What's another spot? Grain of sand in your stem, that's a definite possibility. Typically it would happen if the stem plate or the clamp bolts were not tight, you would run into a potential creak in there. I'm gonna ghost your bike to you. There you go. Thank you, thank you. Frequently it can happen here. So you wanna do proper preparation. So carbon bars like these, we talked about assembly paste earlier, carbon paste. And these bars and this stem, carbon bars, definitely gonna wanna use carbon paste. And like we talked about earlier, the reason for that is to give these two things traction to prevent rotation between each other. So basically you're putting in there grit to point load, to hold on to the handlebar in the stem in one area. And then to go along with that, grease your stem bolts. And that'll increase, so if you say 4 Newton meters, it'll increase the tension on the bolt to what it should be. Most torque specs are assuming that there's proper thread preparation. Another good solid spot to find a creak, rear derailleur hanger. The hanger's mounted to the frame. So you got two materials, you got typically aluminum and aluminum, or aluminum and carbon, aluminum and steel. And if the hanger's not tight, it can allow it to move, and that's another point. All this to say, leave the poor bottom bracket alone. Everybody blames the poor bottom bracket down here. It's just a poor little innocent bottom bracket. So, thanks for joining us. Hope you all enjoyed it. Have a great day. Have fun at Sea Otter.